Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar on graduate opportunities that make a difference. If you could please just drop a message in the chat on the bottom right, or give a thumbs up to let me know you can see and hear us all okay, that'd be great. Very tense, very tense. Cool, thank you, Alice. The panel today consists of Henry from Group GTI, who'll be hosting today's webinar. We have Andrew from the NHS Graduate Management Training Scheme, say that 4 times, Tim from Frontline, Jane from Department of Education, and Lucy from Chatteris. There will be a dedicated time at the end for a Q&A session. So if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please pop them in the chat and we'll get to those by the end of it. So thank you again for tuning in. I'll now hand over to Henry.
Brilliant. Thanks, Connor. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. So, as Connor said, my name's Henry, and I'll be hosting today's session on behalf of Target Jobs. I'm joined by 4 great organisations, and we'll be talking all about careers that make a difference. So, exploring the myths behind meaningful careers, you know, what they really are, and how you can get more out of a career than a simple 9 to 5. Before I hand over to the panellists for intros, I just want to quickly explain today's format as well. So the first half of the webinar will be spent having an open discussion about careers that make a difference, after which we'll be opening up the floor to questions from our viewers. So if you have any questions at any point, you can put them in the questions box on the right-hand side. The questions with the most upvotes will take priority when we get to them at the end, but we'll do our best to answer them all. With that out of the way, I'd like to hand over to the panelists to introduce themselves. Lucy, I'm going to pick on you to go first, I'm afraid. Could you tell us a little bit about what Chatteris do, your role within the organisation?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Henry. So I am Lucy. I am the Recruitment and Marketing Manager at Chatteris Educational Foundation, which is based in Hong Kong. So we are a charity. We were founded in 1990, so 33 years old now. And we exist to support underprivileged students in Hong Kong with their English language development, proficiency, confidence. And we do this by focusing on creating a really enriched English language learning environment. So it's not just about kind of standard classroom lessons, but also about what we do outside of the classroom with students and with learners in the Hong Kong community. So we do a lot of different activities, extracurricular activities, workshops, sessions. We do community outreach initiatives, and a kind of holistic approach to supporting learners' English language development. Our graduate opportunity is the Chatteris International Graduate Programme, and this is a development programme where we welcome about 60 tutors from around the world each year. In our previous intake, we had over 20 different nationalities represented. And they work full-time in local Hong Kong schools to support with that enrichment of the English language learning environment. But in addition to that, it is a development program, so there are lots of different opportunities outside of the classroom for people to get involved in all sorts of areas. So it really facilitates a lot of kind of career transitions and a lot of kind of springboarding into different careers, because you can really get involved in all sorts of different types of things, as well as teaching in the classroom. And yeah, just to confirm, we are based in Hong Kong, and we are a registered charity in Hong Kong, and all of our teaching and all of our programs do take place in Hong Kong. So that is where I am based right now.
Thanks, Lucy. Well, I appreciate you taking the time, especially considering did you say it was 9 p.m. over there at the moment?
Yeah, it was 9 p.m.
Well, thanks for staying up for this one. Brill, Andrew, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So hi everyone, my name is Andrew Davidson. My pronouns are he and him. I'm the NHS Graduate Management Training Scheme Senior Manager for Attraction and Recruitment. So the NHS GMTS for short, it's a bit easier to say, it's a two-year, 2.5-year fast track graduate management training scheme across 6 different specialisms, specifically in England, and to be clear, it's a non-clinical management program as opposed to clinical management programs, which there are many. So the specialisms really are general management, human resources, finance, health informatics, health analysis, policy and strategy. So yeah, we take about 250 trainees each year, and they work within all different areas of the NHS. So it could be within an integrated care system or within an acute trust within their specialism, developing leadership skills and undertaking master's level qualification at the same time. So it's a pretty intense 2-year period, but the progression that we see that trainees have once they finish the scheme is quite significant. So I think it's a phenomenal opportunity within the NHS. I'm really looking forward to talking about it today with everybody else.
Thank you. Jane, would you like to go next?
Hello, I'm Jane Wilkinson. I work with the Department for Education's Get Into Teaching team. I spent a long career teaching young people in schools at the start of my career, and then I moved into this role where it's helping people who are aspiring teachers to make successful applications to get qualified teacher status to allow them to teach across England and the rest of the UK. We help people explore what teaching looks like on a day-to-day basis. Quite honest in terms of what we will tell people in terms of the good, the bad, and the ugly, and what a teaching career might entail and what kind of career progression might be had.
Thank you very much. Well, looking forward to an honest chat today then. And last but not least, Tim, would you mind introducing yourself for us all?
My name's Tim Mann. So I came through the Frontline Graduate Training Scheme into social work in 2015 to 2017. So again, similarly to what Andrew said, it's a 2-year training program. You spend the first year getting your diploma in social work and your second getting a master's. It focuses on children's social work. So I'm a children's social worker and have been for the last 8 years, working in a range of teams from a long-term team called Family Support and Protection, assessment teams, which are the first port of call where a family meets you for the first time, and also for a leaving aftercare service, so working with 16 to 25-year-olds who have been in local authority care. And my job is currently working for Essex as an assessment social worker, but went through the Frontline Graduate Scheme between 2015 and 2017.
Fab. Thank you very much. So as I'm sure everyone can tell, this panel has obviously been chosen for the positive impact that all of your organisations have. But I'd love to hear just quickly how graduates that join might be able to make a difference. So I suppose I'll start with Lucy again for that one, if that's all right. Talk a bit about the difference that you make to people in Hong Kong.
Yeah, of course. So we have a few different kind of avenues in terms of making a difference. They all tend to kind of feed into each other, but there are kind of 2 or 3 kind of separate areas where our graduates and our tutors can really make a difference with learners in Hong Kong. The first of those is with the kind of primary full-time placement that members of our graduate program take part in. So as I said before, when you join the Chatteris International Graduate Program, you are working full-time as a tutor in a local school in Hong Kong, and that is having a direct impact on the students in that school. So it's a 9-month graduate program, and you are in the same school for that full 9 months. So you really get to make that impact and have that hands-on experience with the students throughout the year. And often people say that one of the most rewarding parts of the program is being able to kind of see that development and see that change throughout the year without being the fully qualified classroom teacher. So our graduate program does not require a teaching qualification, and you don't necessarily need to have any teaching experience. So you are not a qualified teacher, you're kind of working in conjunction with other English teachers in the school, and really getting to have a direct impact on those students that you interact with. Because you're not that qualified teacher, you tend to be students in Hong Kong tend to see you as kind of the friendlier option, or the kind of more relaxed, or the more fun teacher, for want of a better word. So it means that they really can kind of open up with you and build that confidence, and in turn build their proficiency, not just in the classroom, but also with the activities and the kind of extracurriculars that we focus on. The other way we can really make a difference in the Hong Kong community is through our community outreach initiatives. So Chatteris this year partners with 7 community outreach programs, and they cover a wide range of initiatives. So one is working with SEN students, another is working with children under 11 from the Hong Kong Asylum Seekers and Refugees Association. One is working with a local kindergarten. There's a real range of different kind of groups that we collaborate with to deliver voluntary sessions led by our tutors at weekends. And again, they're working to kind of enrich the English language learning environment. So providing kind of fun and engaging and interactive workshops for these learners to get involved in so that they can, improve their English and build their confidence in a really fun and dynamic and authentic way, rather than in the way that the typical Hong Kong education system focuses on, which is very strict, very tight, very overworked, to be quite honest. So we really bring that kind of dynamicism and authentic environment for those learners to develop and to grow in. And that is really how you can make a difference to people's lives in Hong Kong. And each year we see in kind of our feedback and in our focus groups and our conversations with people who have attended these sessions, you can really see the difference that it makes year on year, particularly with some of those schools and those community programs that we work with year on year. Each year, about 80% of our schools are returning schools. So you can really see the difference that is made over the years.
Amazing stuff. Thank you. I suppose from teaching to teaching, Jane, do you want to go next?
I think these hundreds of differences that I made in the classroom that I wouldn't even necessarily know every day, because you are constantly working with young people who are in need of something, whether it's academic input, whether it's emotional input, whether it's just some general guidance that they're needing. But I think in terms of my teaching legacy, one of the things that there's two things that I'm most proud of. The first being I took part in an assembly about blood transfusions and blood donation. And on the first day of the assembly, I managed to make about 4 of the students just keel over fainting because they was a bit afraid of blood. And the second day, I got 5 children just dropping in their seats. And I think that is the kind of assembly that people are going to remember, and therefore actually think about donating blood or blood products. So that's a nice little segue for our Andrew. The other thing that I'm also really delighted by is I have also taught many, many refugee children, whether it be from the Somali community or the Afghan community, in the schools that I was working. And all of these schools are in the south of England. And all of those children now have very broad Yorkshire accents, and I couldn't be more proud of that.
Brill. Well, that's one fantastic way to make a difference, isn't it? Tim, I suppose you'll be approaching from a slightly different perspective as sort of a graduate that went into the frontline program. I'd love to hear a little bit about, sort of the positive impact that you've had and what's really stuck with you.
Yeah, I think it's. I was thinking, like, one of the questions that you sent over before was, what do we mean when we talk about careers that make a difference? And I was thinking about that. I think, and I will come on to talking about how social care makes an impact and stuff like that, because I'd be doing us a disservice to not say that. I think what's maybe unique, but don't quote me on that because there might be other organisations that do it, about Frontline, is that Frontline's main prerogative is to make leaders throughout society. And I think that with any job you do, I think I'd always ask the question, why are you in the job that you're in? Are you just going through the motions, or is it just a job? And I think whilst at times we do all go to work to go through the motions because we need to earn a living and like all that sort of stuff, I think one of the things Frontline is good at encouraging you to do is it's encouraging you to say, hey, look, we think social care is a really positive way for you to make a difference, but actually you've got options as well after that program to look at. That is also one of the challenges of coming in as a frontline social worker, as a social worker from the frontline program, because of how that's targeted. But actually I'd say that also is a strength. I've stayed because I love social work, and as I said, I'd be doing it as a disservice to say that we don't have an ability to make a difference. It's a fairly mad job. So no day it's hard to fully articulate like what day-to-day life is like. It's a public facing job, which comes with like challenges of not knowing how your kind of service users are going to respond all the time, and actually having that adrenaline of kind of working through that. And I think the main thing I'd come to in terms of being like the impact of our job is, I'd say that the main thing that I enjoy but also find valuable is that you don't know how many times someone is going to get in front of that person as a social worker. So what you're doing is that you are trying to create change, to work on difficulties, to help situations, and you don't know always where that's going to end and stuff. And I think that's about trying to cause impact in someone. For example, the other week, I went out on a visit with a colleague to visit a dad who'd been labelled as domestically abusive. And I say that in terms of like, it's fairly clear cut that was kind of what was going on from what he'd said and what mum had said as well. But actually, like, meeting him, that was the first time we'd met him in about 3 months. And actually, we were potentially the first people to be in front of him and actually trying to help him change and move forward for his children. And actually, that is a privilege. And I can't believe I'm quoting Jack Grealish, but pressure is a privilege. And I think that pressure of that conversation and trying to work with him on actually what's been working for you and actually how can we help this move forward. He'd started taking medication, for example, which was a huge step actually for him. And yeah, so I'd say that we have those sliding doors moments, and as a social worker, those opportunities to make a difference occur a lot more frequently than they do in other careers, I would say, which has been a great part for me of working in that sector.
Oh, well, that all sounds fabulous. And to be fair, I didn't expect a Jack Grealish quote to make it into this webinar, but I'm glad it has done. And finally, Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, what everyone has said so far really resonates. I mean, I made a career change into this particular role actually from education, so as a senior leader in challenging secondary schools, and latterly a primary head teacher. So the way that each of the speakers today, Lucy, Jane, and Tim are speaking, we probably need longer than an hour really to do this conversation justice, I would say. But specifically around the NHS, I mean, I guess following on from what Tim said, what makes a meaningful career, in terms of choice, the NHS grad scheme, the GMTS because it's got so many different roles, and because it's with the NHS, which is, it's the 8th largest organisation in the world, or employer in the world. I'll try and be relatively concise, but I think starting there, it's easy to say, well, actually, how can you make a difference? It's huge. Yeah, it's so many employees. It's such a large, complex organisation made up of thousands of others, much smaller organisations. How can one person make a difference? But I think you really can, and it really comes back to how person-centered is that role. So Tim talking about the impact it's having with one conversation. I mean, trainees joining the scheme predominantly are coming straight from university, so that they have less experience in the real world in terms of professional experience. We do have a number of graduates joining who perhaps worked in the NHS for a little while, so they're sort of in-service trainees. And the fact that we're non-clinical, it's easy for some to say, well, actually, frontline employees, nurses, doctors, have much more of an impact. They make more of a difference. Well, I guess my argument to that is that it's a team effort. Okay, so the fact that services provided either through social care or social services, through different health organisations, impacting one individual, all need to work together. And that's one of the key challenges. So the development of integrated care systems recently is about services trying to work out regionally how they're going to work together to impact service users at the point of delivery in a better way. And that's not an easy thing to do. So, whether it be, general management trainees joining the scheme, developing as leaders, tackling some of the day-to-day issues like how do we create beds within this particular acute trust during some of the winter pressures, or how do we ensure that service users can access the services, some of the waiting list challenges we've currently got. It takes quite a creative approach to try and solve some of those issues. But even some of the other specialisms like health informatics or finance, for example, that it can be said that they're technical in terms of the content of that particular role. But I had this conversation just this morning around the fact that those particular roles, even though they're considered technical and perhaps non-patient facing or less patient facing, actually the impact they have on the individuals is still quite significant. So, I mean, there's an alumni supporting us with a webinar just recently. His individual role within health informatics during the COVID pandemic was about producing some of the reports that we saw daily on BBC. He's been on the scheme for 2 years. He's into his first substantive post. And yet he's involved in something that's actually impacting decision making that impacts individual communities quite significantly in terms of whether that region is locked down or not locked down. It's about data, but it has a real world impact to the people around us. So we sort of really present the scheme as saying, look, we're looking for people who want to make a difference from day one, because you are going into not just a job, but a role where you are given responsibility and the ability to act autonomously with a lot of support to make change happen and to solve some of the issues that exist. And we're looking for individuals that want to grow into senior NHS leaders of the future, and people who are going to be representative of the communities that they will end up working in and serving. And that's the key thing. I mean, for me, it's partly about service and about representation at a more local level.
No, brilliant. I suppose, Andrew, I wonder if there's a kind of particular point in your career as well that really stands out to you. Obviously, this is a session all about getting more out of a career than a simple 9 to 5. Is there a single point that you could really pinpoint? I suppose a bit like Jane's Assembly.
In my career, that's there probably is actually. I was about to say that's impossible. There's so many interactions. I mean, I'm here representing the NHS, but even within teaching, there's so many interactions that you'll have. It's hard to pinpoint one. I mean, I can speak of one particular. I took on a role. I joined. I was part of a fast track scheme myself many years ago called Future Leaders, and I went to work at a challenging school in Reading. And there was a young lad. My responsibilities were specifically around improving progress at GCSEs. So predominantly for people who needed secure, we're helping secure 5 GCSEs, A to C and above. So that gives you some indication. It was a while ago with the new grade system that's in place. But he was a student that come from Argentina. He'd suffered quite significant challenges in his personal life, and he wasn't engaging in lessons. Full stop. He would stand in the corridor. He would listen to music. My subject's music, so I was a music teacher originally. But he would refuse to engage, and he was quite an aggressive individual. He really struggled to I guess build positive relationships, and just persistently day in day out. Before I went into my lesson, I'd stand with him. I'd chat. I'd joke. We weren't conversing because it was one way. But I'd get him into his lesson. We'd make light of the fact he was outside. I would say that he'd been telling me it was his favourite lesson in the world, and he loved this particular teacher. And eventually got a smile. But I got a letter at the end of that year. Wasn't expecting to, but it was to his ability writing just to say huge thank you. He'd achieved his 5 GCSEs, A to C. I'm sort of welling up slightly inside. It's going to be hard for me to carry on talking, but it made a massive difference to him. And at the time, it's not one interaction. That's hundreds, thousands of individual interactions that you have that over time makes a big difference. I mean, there are lots of examples of that, but that's probably the one that sticks out for me the most.
Oh, brilliant. And I think at the end of the day, when it comes to talking about sort of careers that make a difference, social care, teaching, the NHS, it is really those pinpoint moments that people talk about, and that really makes the job worth it. So it's really great to hear about it from you guys. I do appreciate it. Conversely, though, do you think there's any kind of particular myths behind, let's say, careers that make a difference? Tim, as somebody who's kind of only recently done the graduate program, you might be in quite a good position to talk about that.
Yeah, I think think whenever I tell people what I do, I usually get one of two responses. The first is, "Oh, I couldn't do that job," and the second one is, "Oh, that must be really rewarding, like at times and stuff like that." And I think like I get it. There's truth in both of them, but I think also like, when I was thinking about them as myths, I think actually like a lot of people. I think there's a lot of people who are locked out of professions like the ones we do because they feel like they're not equipped to do it, and they feel like it's a challenge, and it is a challenge, and it is hard work and stuff. But I think that actually, with the high levels of, particularly in social care, and I know that's not always been the case, and I'm very lucky to work for a local. I mean, they pay me to say this, but as in I'm very lucky to work for a local authority who are outstanding. I should say, yeah, there's no money, but I literally get paid by Essex, was my point there, just because this has been recorded. But yeah, no, yeah, I think actually the support around you is a lot in social care at the minute. Actually, it's changed a lot since the kind of Eileen Munro reviews and stuff like that. So actually, like, I think there's a lot of people who could do this job who couldn't necessarily. It's vital for our profession with the amount of diversity that we need in this workforce, in terms of the diversity of the kind of country, and actually the amount of issues that come up, that we have that. And I think that's one of the biggest things for me. And I think the rewarding stuff, I think actually it's a really rewarding job. But I think if you're going into this job like to be rewarded, I think that's where it becomes difficult. And I think that actually as social workers, there are people who go in and they kind of have a bit of a savior narrative around them. And I think that's maybe the same in all caring professions. And actually you need to unlearn that a lot because actually you have limitations, and you are just one person in the system, and you can make incredible change. And I think an example of what massively humbled me is that so Frontline do a lot of training in systemic family therapy, and which I won't kind of bore people with going into, but you can go and look it up. Really quite academic concepts and stuff like that have been developed over the years. And I remember I was meeting with this one family again. It was a domestic abuse situation, and mum had got into a new relationship which was quite abusive, and maternal grandmother had basically reacted by going to court, getting an order for granddaughter, an interim order to take her with her on an interim basis. And I remember like meeting with mum and doing all these like interventions that I'd been trained to do, and all that sort of stuff. And we were on the doorstep, and there was just this throwaway comment that I made to mum. Grandma had come to pick up the child because mum had contact, and I just said, "Oh, you do realise your mum's not angry at you?" Because mum looked furious, like complete throwaway comment, not trained, etc. The next day, she'd gone to live with her nan. She'd left the relationship, and genuinely left the relationship in terms of what we knew, and was back caring for her daughter within like a couple of months and stuff. And actually I asked her later, I was like, what was it? And she was like, it was that comment. And it massively humbled me in terms of being like, this job is like, you are throwing seeds down and you're seeing what lands half the time, which is what I said earlier. And actually I was lucky enough that landed, but a lot of our job is a lot of hard graft that is very frustrating. And if you're not going in, I think because you feel called to do it, because you feel it's important to try and make a difference, if you're going in for it to be rewarding, then I think you're going to end up disappointed. Whereas I think if you're going in because you want to do the job, because you love the job, because you love the mission statement of all these guys, like different things, I think that's where it is important and stuff.
No, that's a really good point. I think a lot of people looking at roles like this probably think, well, it's going to feel so rewarding, as you say. I'm going to always feel fantastic doing this, but they don't really acknowledge the potentially really difficult times that come with that as well. Lucy, conscious we've not heard from you in a minute, is there, I suppose, any disconnects between expectation and reality within Chatteris's program, or?
So this was something that I actually spoke to one of our tutors about the other day, in terms of, does it meet or does it exceed expectations when you join our program? And something that we got speaking about was this idea, I don't know if you've come across this term, but this idea of like voluntourism that became quite popular online kind of in the last few years. So of course we are like an international teaching opportunity. So whilst in our most recent program we had over 20 different nationalities, the bulk of our tutors still do come from the UK, from America, from Canada, are our kind of top places. So it is an international opportunity, and people do travel to Hong Kong to do this opportunity. And I think a lot of people, in terms of myths around this career, see English teaching abroad as something that is kind of akin to just doing a gap year. Like it's something, I don't really know what I want to do, so I'll just teach English abroad and I'll basically just travel around for a bit and maybe do some teaching here and there. And there's not really like a connection with what they're actually doing. And I was speaking with one of our tutors about this, about how when he was looking for this role, so this time last year or just over a year ago, and when he was looking for this role, he looked at loads of different teaching opportunities, all of which seemed very much like that kind of opportunity. There wasn't much connection with the students. The marketing and the website wasn't very much about the students and how you can impact the students, but more about kind of come and live in Asia, and we'll pay you to live in Asia, and we'll pay for you to get, a TEFL while you're here, and kind of throw away things that weren't really feeding into like a genuine connection and a genuine impact with the beneficiaries that we're serving. And the tutor said that in the end, that's why he chose Chatteris, and that's why he, became the tutor that he has and is in the role that he has. But I see this in so many of the interviews that I do. It's even a question that we ask in the interviews. We say to people, like, what appeals to you about Chatteris compared to all of these other teaching English abroad opportunities? And I always get a similar answer, which is like the one that I've just described. But a lot of people, I think, feed into that myth about teaching English abroad because it still happens, and it's still the case. And there is kind of work to be done to separate opportunities like Chatteris from other opportunities that, do feed into that kind of idea, where it is just, I'm going to go to Asia, or I'm going to go to Africa and take pictures with kids. And that's kind of the extent of the role, rather than actually having kind of that hands-on experience and that actual kind of real interactions with the students that are the ones that then make a difference. And quite similarly to Tim, I was a graduate on our graduate program. I did it a couple of years ago, and I worked in a local secondary school. And yeah, like as Andrew said, and as everyone has said, so far there's thousands of interactions that go into that feeling of actually making a difference and actually having an impact. But mine was interestingly so Chatteris works mostly with very low proficiency schools. They are underprivileged schools, and therefore that tends to go hand in hand with low proficiency. Other than many of the students who are at school in Hong Kong who are from South Asian countries. So a lot of these students who are from Pakistan or from India or from Malaysia who have moved to Hong Kong have excellent English, and their English is kind of miles ahead of their classmates, but then they struggle in kind of all of the other lessons and the other subjects, particularly, the Chinese taught subjects. My impacts definitely, I think, came with those students. Like my most measurable or my most kind of noticeable impacts came with those students, because they were the ones that other teachers would maybe say were very difficult, or they couldn't work out how to connect with them, and they were very badly behaved and they really struggled with them. And then I realized that all it took was talking to them about Star Wars or about Marvel, and it helped them to open up and to really connect with someone, and really build their confidence and get rid of some of the shyness and the inhibitions that they had about being the different person in their class. And that was where you could really see the difference being made. But I think it's something that really kind of dispels the myths about teaching English abroad, because it definitely doesn't fit into that idea of kind of volunteerism or those kind of aspects of teaching English abroad specifically.
Thank you so much. I suppose we've touched quite a lot on, I suppose this expectation versus reality and the kind of preconceived notions that people have going into these roles. So I suppose following on from that, is there anything that you particularly look for in a candidate who's applying for your organisation, or I suppose any skill or personality trait that really kind of demonstrates a candidate's motivation to work in a role? Andrew, do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have, I guess, a relatively robust assessment selection process that starts in sort of September, and it takes a good period of time, and there's lots of different components to it. But what makes a good candidate? I mean, I don't think there's one set of circumstances or one set of criteria that makes it, one good candidate. And I think what we try and do is we're looking for a really wide range, a really diverse pool of applicants, and that's not just about ethnic diversity. It's about diversity of thought, diversity of personality, because people are many and varied, aren't they? I mean, and understanding individual communities, understanding how different people think. When you've got lots of quite tough challenges, you need a whole variety of different people to come together to think about it in different ways to try and find an accurate solution. But I think something that I think everyone's sort of touched on a little bit is actually alignment to the mission, really. In my case, the NHS specifically, but people who really deeply understand why they want to work in this organisation, to work in this sector, tend to do a lot better. So I have a really secure, understanding about why I'm in this particular role, working within the NHS now, with my background in education. Because of that, I know the impact that finding leaders within the NHS who make change within local communities to do with health has on education, and how it improves access for individuals in education. But likewise, for anyone joining our scheme, high degree of mission alignment and understanding that's probably been built over a number of years. So, I'm very keen to develop our awareness of the scheme and the NHS specifically over a longer period, so from school age, because people that come to us and say, look, I've been wanting to do this a long time. I have my family has experienced this, or I know people, I've been to this country and I've seen that. So this is why I want to work in healthcare in this sector, to improve either a very specific part longer term, or even just broadly. They always do far better because there's a reason. They're passionate and they have a particular reason for wanting to be successful, rather than those individuals that say, oh, okay, it's a high profile graduate scheme, that's great, the salary's okay, the progression is fantastic, that's why I want to, I want to be a part of that, tend not to do as well because they don't have an underlying deep understanding about why they're doing it. And I think that's probably what we're at the core. We're looking for a lot of other stuff as well, but really at the core, that's probably the first thing to start with.
Fantastic, thank you. Jane, I'd love to hear from you on this as well. I suppose within teaching, is there any kind of quality or, let's say before, kind of motivation that you really look for?
I think very, very similar to Andrew, the types of things that he would be looking for people going into working within the NHS would be similar to those going into teaching or even into social work. In my career, I've kind of touched upon each of those sectors. So I started in social care, went into graphic design, then into the NHS, and then into teaching. And so therefore, a lot of things that people are saying are very resonant. But I think the kind of skills that I had from having experience in all of those types of settings was resilience, which is, I think, a big thing, and inquiry. So when we're working with people who are thinking about getting into teaching, one of the things that we ask them is, well, what are your reasons? And oftentimes people will come up with those kind of frequently said things like, oh, well, 2 days alike, or, it's going to make a difference. But there isn't enough substance in that. And we send people off to kind of do some research and to find out what a training program might look like. But we are finding more and more graduates are not willing or able to pick up a phone and speak to a course provider. And I think that's one of the things that if you're not able to stand in front of a group of people and deliver a presentation, or if you're not able to pick up a phone to do the necessary research and invest in yourself, then I think in any of the careers that we're talking about today, I think people are going to struggle with that. So it's about pushing boundaries, kind of feeling the fear of picking that phone up and speaking to a stranger perhaps, and just doing it, irrespective of whether or not you're feeling anxious about doing that, and building that kind of resilience, because you can teach for 50 years and you're always going to have lessons that are not going as you would want it to go. And so you need to have resilience to enable yourself to bounce back into that. Or you could be working with a young person and their family, and they're kind of not meeting the hopes and ambitions that you have for them. And so you need some kind of inner motivation to kind of get you up each day to go into that environment, to be helping these people, because you do find that years and years afterwards you kind of get people coming back to you and saying, well, if it wasn't for you doing what you did in your career, then I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing in mine. And that does apply, I would suggest, to all of the sectors that are represented here today. Have you frozen, Henry?
I believe Henry will be rejoining us in a second.
About that, guys. I think Henry's having some technical difficulties. Are there any other points you guys want to add on to what was previously said? Oh, he's back.
Hello, sorry about that. I absolutely dreaded that happening. I just had a really bad feeling about it.
It's fine. I'll let you get back to it.
Thank you. No, well, listen, Jane, I'd say a good 90% of your answer there. And I suppose on the one hand, it's, probably good and quite reassuring that teaching is such an aspirational thing. But do you think it can also potentially be a bit of a hindrance then, in that people might, I suppose, want to go into it without having done the proper research?
Yeah, potentially. I think that's why we see such a dropout. I mean, and I'm speaking from experience in as much as myself, I kind of wanted to be an educational psychologist, having worked in mental health previously, and thought, I'll get this teaching qualification and I'll go off and do that. And, I thought, I'll be doing a teach training course. I'll be sitting around the lake at this particular university that I was going to be studying with. And I didn't realise for a minute that I'd be going into two different schools and actually physically teaching these young people. And I felt absolutely and utterly underprepared in that regard. I was lucky in as much as I've done lots and lots of different work previously. I'd looked after the elderly in the community. I'd worked in mental health settings. I'd been a graphic designer for a very, very short period of time, because I absolutely hated doing that. And so therefore, I think, whilst I was underprepared, I was able to kind of hit the ground running and realise within a very, very short period of time that actually teaching was fantastic, and I really loved it, working with these young people, and saw the difference that I was being able to make to those lives, and kind of continued with that. But I think the skill sets that you develop for these types of careers are massively transferable. So where I'm not in a position where I was absolutely enjoying working with those young people, there was lots of other opportunities that I could have gone off and actually done as well.
Fabulous, thanks so much. Conscious of time, so I suppose just one more question from me really before we move on to questions from the public. Paid opportunities in these sort of, I suppose, aspirational kind of careers that make a difference, let's say especially in the charity sector, but I imagine within the NHS and teaching as well, I'm conscious that it can be incredibly competitive. I remember how kind of hard it was to get my foot in the door at charities when I graduated, because it's something I was quite keen on. Is there anything graduates can do outside of work to increase their chances of landing, let's say, a dream role at your organisation? What kind of extracurricular things might you look for? Tim, as a recent graduate, do you want to start?
Yeah, I think I think there's a lot of, obviously, I think when you're talking about like financial situations, obviously we don't know anyone's financial circumstances, so as in that's going to have an impact and stuff like that. I think that having done it 8 years ago, the graduate wage that you go in at is very competitive. Like there is weighting to at the time it was around London and Manchester, and there was weighting towards living around the London area as part of Frontline, just in terms of the cost going up. They're now stationed all across England. I can see Isabel asked if there was a similar scheme in Scotland. I'm not aware of one. I did check this morning in terms of Frontline, and they are northeast to southwest of England is basically where they stem to and from. The wages have always been relatively competitive. I have to say, in social care, like actually there is opportunities to go up. The wages are, again, like I've always found them fine. I've never had a personal issue with them. But again, I'm aware that people have different situations, people have different dependencies, all that sort of stuff, basically. I don't know, Henry, if there was anything else you wanted to ask on that, or
I suppose with that sort of competitiveness about it, then is there anything extracurricular that people can do in their spare time to hopefully increase their chances of getting onto that scheme?
I knew I'd missed something from your question as well.
Right.
So I think that for me, actually, when I was looking to get onto it, I'd had previous experience through volunteering. So actually, I was lucky enough that so I went to Durham, and I was lucky enough that we had quite an active community volunteering scheme, which actually gave me the opportunity to work with children on respite holidays for those who had been open to social care. And I know those respite holidays exist across the whole of the UK still. So actually, like the opportunity to get out and actually volunteer in that respect, I think is really, really important. Obviously, the thing with the graduate scheme is if you don't get onto it when you're 21, there's still opportunities after that. So actually, a lot of people who did the program were a multitude of different ages as well. So actually, going away and, as Jane alluded to, getting experience in different fields is useful and really important as well. So I'd say just try and put yourself in front of as many opportunities as possible for any of these careers, like that actually might be useful and can transfer and stuff like that.
Brilliant, thank you. Andrew, I can see you're actually being active in the chat, so thank you very much for that one.
Trying.
No, not at all. Always appreciate it. From your side then, are there any extracurriculars? Because I'm conscious that I suppose it's a little bit different to the other organisations we've got in this webinar in terms of, I suppose, maybe a bit more of a business and a management focus. Are there any sort of extracurriculars that you'd look out for particularly?
Nothing specific, but I was sort of responding to Asish. I'm hoping I pronounced that correctly in the chat. So I think something we look for, and it's probably be applicable to I think most sort of graduate roles or people applying for work, is that you're demonstrating an interest in something. Whether that be volunteering opportunities. There's lots and lots of opportunities to get involved in healthcare orientated programs. So we've been through the pandemic, and hopefully that won't come back. But people could volunteer at vaccination centres. There were lots of opportunities to work in community-run services, whether that be anything from meeting and greeting, working with people of different ages. Ultimately, what we're looking for is someone that is demonstrating an ability to be proactive, independent. Identifying that they can support, they can help, and they're doing something about that. In terms of the scheme specifically, we provide a huge amount of professional training. So, there's no expectation that someone is coming to us with, an in-depth understanding of human resources or health informatics or finance. We will provide that level of content, understanding, and knowledge. But I think what we are expecting and looking for is someone that has an understanding of the NHS. or the issues that exist within the NHS, and what that might mean for them and for others around them in their communities. And that most of that can be found within the news or within a little bit of research, but that definitely makes a difference if someone is talking about something they've seen, they've understood, and relating that to how that might look in terms of their role, moving forward.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. Well, listen, guys, thanks so much for dealing with these, I suppose, questions from me. We'll now move on to questions from the chat really quickly, because again, this has taken 50 minutes and I can't believe that. It's really absolutely flown by. There was more I wanted to cover, but so much appreciated. I'm just scrolling through the chat now, because as I say, I've just been enamored with this chat. We've got one from Amina, which might be for you, Jane. So Amina, I'm sorry, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, says, I'm interested in teaching and recently just completed an honours degree in criminology, planning to do a PGDE next year in Scotland. Any tips or advice would be massively appreciated.
We don't support people applying for teacher training courses in Scotland, but the types of advice that we would give for those training in England would be exactly the same. So slightly different types of training in Scotland, in as much as you have to have that PGDE, which is a diploma rather than a certificate. But actually in England, you don't need to have either the certificate or the diploma to be considered a qualified teacher. You must have QTS. So those who train in England can go and teach in Scotland and vice versa. I think in terms of tips for getting onto a teacher training course up in Scotland is really and truly do the research into what it is that you're going to be getting into. So what schools will your university put you into? Because the majority of the time that you're doing your training, you will be spent practicing teaching in 2 different schools for a minimum of 120 days, as well as doing those PGDE assignments and essays. And so therefore have a think about, okay, well, what's driving me into teaching? What kind of schools and career progression might I want post training to help you make sure that you start crafting your skills very, very early on. So for example, I knew that I wanted to work with special educational needs children, of those who had suffered mental illness. And so therefore, when I was looking at my teacher training course provider, I was able to go into my first placement school that had a hearing impairment unit within that. And that was one of the best things that I could have done in terms of my future career, because that led me to being qualified to work in pupil referral units or alternative educational settings. And so therefore from day one, really, I was really setting up where my career path might lead. But if it's somebody who wants to work in a faith school or a grammar school or a fully comprehensive school, all alternative settings, then just making sure that one of those school placements that you will have on your training gives you that opportunity and experience.
Brilliant. Thank you. So this next one is from Azish. Hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. How do you deal personally with the emotional impact of your lines of work? How can a prospective applicant prepare for it? And I think this is a really interesting one that potentially all of you could have quite a good answer for, I imagine. So I don't know if anybody wants to start on that one.
I'm happy to.
Bro?
That works. I think that I think that it's one of those jobs where I've thought about this a lot, because obviously we deal with a lot of heavy stuff. I've sat and, again, not to just to kind of cover the kind of bases that we sat in. I've sat to and listened to people who have been through sexual abuse. I've sat through people who have been exploited by gangs, listened to domestic abuse victims like speaking about, or survivors talking about their experiences and stuff like that. Like, it's really heavy stuff. And actually, I think one of the main experiences I had with it is it was very intensive, and it gets you to kind of, you almost become quite self-critical of yourself in lots of ways, because you're I think you're aware how difficult life can be, and how difficult life can be, and the impact that we can all have on each other and stuff like that. I think for me, it's really hard to answer, but I think that, again, it starts with that point I said earlier of why are you going into the career that you're going into? Because for me, I've kind of been able to resolve that as long as I've done what I can do at the end of the day, I can go home and put it down. Because the alternative is I don't do this job, and that for me is not what I want to do. So for me, it's kind of just that reframe as being able to be like, okay, right, have I done everything practically that I can do? Okay, well, I'm going to go home then, and I'm going to kind of manage that, which is really hard. I don't know if that's an internal thing that is specific to people, because I know that's not always been possible for me on all cases and stuff like that. And then it's the high quality level of supervision that you have. It's the conversations you have with the people in and outside of work about situations. Big fan of therapy as well. I think like just generally going through therapy is useful to process things. Our work also have the opportunity to access that through work on a short-term basis. So yeah, all of those things I think have to kick in, but I think also it comes back to what's my other option is not to do this job. So do I want to do this job or not, basically?
Brilliant, thank you. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add to that one from your perspectives.
I think, one of the things that I've noticed around particularly social workers and often teachers and even healthcare professionals is this kind of camaraderie and almost a gallows humour. So you share the experiences with one another and lean very much on your colleagues. And as Tim says, you've got that supervision or you've got that kind of mentor within that workplace. And I think it's really important to use that support that's available. People feel, I think, sometimes that, you've got to do it all and you've got to kind of wrap these children up in cotton wool and make sure that they're not harmed by anybody or anything. And that's just totally unreasonable. You are only able to make a small part of a difference in that person's life. And so therefore it's about recognizing your sphere of influence and making sure that any safeguarding procedures are followed so that those children are getting the help that they deserve. But I think that is quite a steep learning curve, in as much as you kind of think, oh yeah, I can be the solver of all problems, and you just can't. So leave the ego at the door, and then you're able to kind of get on with what it is that you're absolutely loving generally.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we've kind of touched on sort of leaving your ego at the door and focusing more on, I suppose, the impact of your work rather than, what it means to you a lot. And that seems like really, really good advice. So thank you. Lucy, we've got one specifically for you here from Samuel. I'm a health and social care graduate interested in the Hong Kong program. How can I fit into the program, and how and when do you recruit?
The easy question to start off with, how and when we recruit. So our recruitment is done on, we have kind of 3 deadlines throughout the year. So our program starts in August each year, which means we begin recruiting in about September, prior to the start of the program. And we have deadlines in kind of December, March and May. So we have just passed the deadline for this year's program. However, I would say that if you are interested in joining us, I would recommend to still send that application in. And it may just be that it is kept on file, or if you are interviewed and you are successful, being added to a wait list that we have, because we do get dropouts and withdrawals throughout the year on each program. In terms of how we recruit, we have an online application form, and then you also send a CV and cover letter directly to me. The online application form is where, so because we don't require a teaching qualification or any teaching experience, this application form is where you can really demonstrate some of the skills that we're looking for. So we have 2 long form written questions that are looking at your creativity, your problem solving, your leadership, or your mentoring skills. And for those of you who are interested who don't have any teaching experience or don't have a teaching qualification, this really demonstrates a commitment to those skills. I think I lost connection there for a second.
I think we got it all.
You got me.
Yep.
In terms of Sam asked about how to fit into the program, as I mentioned before, we have kind of 20 different nationalities represented this year. And Hong Kong is a really diverse place, both ethnically and in terms of background, in terms of experience. It is a real mixed bag of a city. And in terms of fitting into the program, it's actually quite a big mix of different things that you can do. And I wouldn't say there's one necessary way to fit in, particularly as a lot of our tutors are placed in different schools. We work with about 30 different partner schools each year. And each of those does, of course, come with a different experience. Each school will have a slightly different way of operating and a slightly different way of doing things. And it means that there's a real varied experience across the program, which is great for kind of sharing ideas, sharing knowledge, and sharing development with each other as well. And as I mentioned previously, there's so many different kind of opportunities for you to develop your own interests and your own passions outside of that tutoring role as well. So, for example, when I joined the program, I knew that I was interested in marketing within education. And whilst I was a tutor, I made sure that I got involved in as many kind of marketing related things as possible. So I was on the blog team, I was a newsletter and promotional materials coordinator. I did lots of kind of marketing elements within my school. And it means that you don't necessarily need to fit into one idea of a Chatteris tutor on the program, but you really get to kind of shape and mold the experience for your own and to fit your own goals, your own interests.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Well, listen, we're at 3 o'clock, very conscious of the time. Please do join me, everybody watching, in saying a massive thank you to all of the panelists for giving their time on this beautiful summer's day, or in Lucy's case, summer's evening. And thank you as well to everyone who's attended, asked questions, and engaged. It looks like we've got Connor back on screen. So take it away, Connor.
Cool, thanks, Henry. Yeah, thank you so much to all our panelists for that information. I'm sure that was very, very helpful to everybody watching. I'm just going to stick on the screen now a link to our Target Jobs page, and feel free to go on there and follow any of the organizations you found helpful today. If you do that, you can check out any upcoming events or their latest opportunities. We also run webinars regularly on all different subjects, and next Thursday we have a webinar on how to build your personal brand. So like I said, check out the link, go to the events and sign up. Thank you once again to everybody who joined, and enjoy the rest of your days.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, guys. Bye-bye.
Cheers, guys. Have a good one.
Thank you.